You may be seated. A form of discipline that is pretty popular today among many parents and educators is timeout. Timeout seems to be the punishment of choice by most moms and dads and teachers, replacing spanking, yelling, and threatening. These were my mother and father's three favorite responses to bad behavior. They seem to have gotten those three down: spanking, yelling, and threatening. A timeout is about taking an unruly child and placing that child in temporary isolation, letting them be alone for a period of time so they can think over what they've done, so that they can reflect upon their unaccepted behavior and in hopes of having a change of heart. I believe that probably God is the first one to come up with timeout, because I believe that God put Jonah in timeout. He isolated him away from everything in the world, away from every person. He put him in a situation that the only thing he could do was what? Think and reflect about his behavior. Now, let's just recap real quickly where we are and how we got to where we are today. Now, you remember God came to Jonah and gave him an assignment. And that assignment was to go to Nineveh and preach judgment and repentance. Now, Nineveh is about 500 miles away. It would take him about 3 months to go there. Nineveh is the capital of the Assyrian Empire. And the Assyrians are rather mean and cruel and hateful and evil people. They had no use for the Jews, and the Jews despised and extremely hated them. The Assyrians and the Jews were bitter enemies. And I would think, as far as Jonah was concerned, if he would treat Nineveh the same way he treated Sodom and Gomorrah, that would be fine with Jonah. He could care less. Undoubtedly, Jonah does not want to be an agent or an instrument of God's grace to the people of Nineveh. I think by the very fact that he was sending Jonah to go there to warn them meant that God wanted them to repent so God could show them his grace and mercy and forgiveness. And that's the last thing that Jonah wants for these people. And so Jonah decides, I want no part of this. And so in stubborn disobedience, in open defilement, he did what? He said no and turned away and walked away from God. I guess in his way of thinking, out of sight, out of mind, out of sight. I want nothing to do with this. And so we're told that he goes down to Joppa, buys him a ticket, and heads to Tarshish. Now, Tarshish is some 2,000 miles away. It's going to take probably a year to a year and a half to get there. But we see God does what? God sends a storm to stop him from running. Now, the sailors on this boat realize that this is just not a storm brought up by Mother Nature because of the intensity of it, and they begin to realize that there's a God behind this storm. And so they begin to pray to their gods that they would stop this storm. They even approached Jonah and asked him to pray to his God. We're not told that Jonah ever prayed. I think Jonah, we told that he was in the boat asleep. He was very content with what he was thinking and how he was feeling. He could care less about what God had asked him to do. And we see that I guess you could say they drew straws, and Jonah got the short straw. That means, buddy, you're the problem. You're the cause of this problem. Implying that the storm will not stop until what? Until we do something about the problem. And so he told them to, take me and throw me overboard. Well, it seems the sailors here felt that if we throw him overboard, he's certain to die. it's going to happen. So they did not want his blood on their hands, and so they tried to make it to shore, but the storm continued to intensify, and they realized that they were not going to survive, and so they did what? They threw him overboard. Now, Jonah could have approached this a different way. He could have said, now guys, I'm running from God. God's want me to do something. Okay, I'm going to do it. Let's turn around and go back and take me to Joppa, and I'll go on to Nineveh. Now, that probably would have stopped the storm, but like most of us people, he would rather die than change his attitude and his thinking, right? Most of us would rather die and change. And so they throw him into the water. From his prayer, it seems to imply that he only treaded water. Even though the storm stopped immediately, he only treaded water for a short period of time, and then he began to sink. He talks about going down to the mountains underneath the surface of the water. Undoubtedly, he began to take in water in his lungs, and the oxygen supply to his brain started cutting off, and he felt like, this is it. This is it. I'm going to die. And then all of a sudden, this man-eating fish, a rather huge fish, came and swallowed him whole. Now, I'd say your day's not going very good for you, wouldn't you? You've already been thrown into the sea. You've already started sinking. You know this is it. Then all of a sudden, this huge man-eating fish just consumes you. And the next thing you know, that you're in the stomach, in the belly of this fish. Now, I don't know about you, but I would say I would probably be a little disoriented right there at the beginning, wouldn't you? In this stinky, smelly, wet, extremely dark place, inside the stomach of this fish, there would be not the light of day. It would be so dark, I doubt if Jonah could even see his hand in front of his face. Have you ever experienced that kind of darkness? Just extreme darkness inside the belly of a fish. Now, I think this dark place that Jonah was in was not only a physical dark place, I also think it was a spiritual and emotional dark place too. Haven't we all, I'd say most of us, haven't we been in some dark places in our lives? Haven't we gone through some pretty dark times? It's not a wonderful place to be, is it? Because dark places are hard and difficult. There's feelings of uncertainty and confusion. We feel trapped and overwhelmed. Most of us did not like those dark places that we found ourselves in. It might be in relationships. Maybe your spouse and your children have decided that they can't live with you, and so they just leave. And you're in a very dark place. You've had an addiction for a long period of time. You've been unable to work. You don't have any money. You can't pay your house payment. You can't pay rent on an apartment, and so you have nowhere to live. And so you found yourself on the street, and you're in a pretty dark place in your life when you don't have a place to live. About a month ago, a young girl that I knew from Malden was in high school while I was there, comes from a very good family. But she has made a lot of bad choices and decisions in her life. About 3 weeks ago, she came in here. She's homeless. She has nowhere to live. Her mom and daddy just can't take it anymore. They're about broke trying to keep her head above water. And she's in a dark place. Maybe you've lost your job. Haven't had any employment for a long period of time now. You're at the age that nobody wants to hire you. It's just a dark place. It's a very dark place that you find yourself in. Jonah's in a very dark place in our scripture today. A place he probably never thought he would be in, never anticipated being in. And I found that when we experience those dark places, we go through all kinds of emotions, all range of emotions. I would think, wouldn't you feel like that if you've been swallowed by a fish and you're in there and this gosh awful stench and half rotten fish around you? It's dark, and you realize this fish is probably just having a good day, and you're trying to do what? Gain your balance and maybe fighting some seasickness. I would say I'd be afraid, wouldn't you? I'd be afraid, especially afraid of the unknown. Jonah's never been in this situation before. He has no idea what the outcome is going to be. I think probably when he first got there, he began to think, is there going to be enough air in here for me? Where's the oxygen coming from? How am I going to believe? How am I going to breathe? Am I going to suffocate to death in here? Are these digestive juices, these gastric acids, are they going to dissolve my skin and I'm just going to die a slow, painful death? If that's what's going to happen to me? Is he going to swallow some other creature and it's going to come in here and eat me up? Sometimes when we're in a place of darkness, it's scary because there's so many unknowns there. Will I ever have my own home again? Will my children never speak to me? Will anybody ever hire me at my age? Will this chemotherapy work? Will it destroy my cancer or will it take me out? It's just a lot of unknowns. When you find yourself in a dark place, there are a lot of unknowns. And it makes you afraid and it makes you scared. I think not only was he afraid, I think he was probably angry. Sometimes in those dark places, we just get angry. We're mad. We're mad that life has not turned out the way we wanted it to. We're mad that life is working against us. We're angry. Sometimes we get angry at God. I thought you were a loving God. I thought you were a caring God. I thought you were a God of mercy and grace. If you're that kind of God, why am I in this situation? God, you knew that I hated those people. You knew the last thing I would want to do is go and preach to those people. You know my heart. You know my insight. There are other prophets you could have asked to do that. Why'd you ask me? You knew exactly how I was going to respond. God, I just think you're mistreating me. I really do. I'm just mad at you, God. I'm just angry at you. Some of us here this morning could probably tell us of times that you've just been mad. You've been angry at God. Because God just has not done the things the way you thought he should do them. Sometimes I think maybe Jonah was just mad that the very fact that these Assyrians even existed. The world would be much better off without them. Why in the world is God letting these people hang around? We don't need these kind of people in our world. We would be much better off without them. I'm just angry that these people even exist. And then maybe he's angry at himself, that he let his pride get in the way. And his pride brought him to where he is at this very moment, inside the stomach of a fish in absolute darkness. Jonah probably thought, I could at least made the 3-month trip and then made a decision after I got there. No, not me. I'm a hardhead. I'm stubborn. You know, right off the bat, I just responded and reacted without thinking one bit. And look where it's got me. That's where it's got me without thinking about what I was doing. I just did it. I just reacted. That's my nature. That's who I am. I just always react without thinking. And look where it's got me. Look where it's got me. I think he was afraid. I think he was angry. And I think he probably had a pity party, probably drowning in his sorrows. You know, sometimes when we feel like we failed everybody. I've failed God. I failed the people of Nineveh. God was wanting to give them a chance to repent. I failed myself. You know, sometimes, you know, when we're in a dark place, it's a good place to kick yourself. It's a good place to beat yourself up. Because usually we're in a dark place because something has failed. And oftentimes, not every time, but often, we're the problem. We're the reason for the failure. And then we just beat ourselves up. But more than anything else, I think he was probably feeling a sense of hopelessness, of helplessness. I'm in a situation that I have no control over, and I don't see any way of getting out of it. I don't see any light at the end of the tunnel. I'm in a situation that's probably going to get worse and not better. Have you ever had that feeling of helplessness and hopelessness? That this situation is beyond your ability to control it. You will not be able to decide the outcome of it at all. And so there is that feeling of hopelessness and helplessness because you see no way out. No way out. Sometimes when you work with people with addictions, whether it's alcohol or drugs, and they have tried to quit numbers of times. Sometimes they don't let anybody know. They just try on their own because they don't want to tell anybody because they don't want them to know that they failed again. And eventually they just accept there is no way out. There is no way out. I would like to think that Jonah, inside the stomach of this fish, is feeling there is no way out. It's just, I'm just hopeless. But as we look at his prayer this morning, undoubtedly, he began to realize that God was preserving him and that he wasn't going to die. It's probably been 2, maybe 2.5 days now, and I'm still breathing. I don't know how. But some way or another, oxygen is getting inside the stomach of this fish. And these gastric acids, my skin is fine. My lips aren't burning. My eyes aren't stinging. I don't understand it. But I'm okay. I'm okay. Maybe God is preserving me. Maybe this fish swallowing me was not an accident. Maybe this fish swallowed me on purpose. It was a plan of God's to rescue me from my disobedience, to rescue me and preserve me and keep me. Maybe this place of darkness that I'm in is for my good. Maybe it's to help me, not to hurt me. Maybe God has allowed me to be in this situation for a particular reason, and it's for my good. It almost seems like in the prayer as he begins to pray that he's finding peace in this. Peace in this place of darkness. And the thing that you and I need to know that if we ever find ourselves in a place of darkness, there is the possibility of finding peace in our darkness, in that place of darkness, when we're going through a dark time in our life. Jonah has not been vomited up on the shore yet. He's still inside this fish. That has not changed. But in his prayer, he seems to be coming to peace with it. I think three things happened to him as he realized that God was preserving him, that God was saving him, that God was rescuing him, that God sent the storm to stop him from running, and God sent the fish to stop him from drowning. That this is all God. This is all God. God is in control of this situation. And what we see in the prayer is that, first of all, Jonah begins to refocus on God. He's no longer focusing, per se, on the conditions he finds himself in, but he's focusing now on God. You know, one of the things we have to do whenever we go through a dark and difficult time, if we want to get through it, we can't focus on the things that are happening to us. We can't focus on the fact that I don't have anywhere to live. We can't focus on the fact that I'm dying of a terminal disease. We can't focus on the fact that my family, my children have left me. We can't focus on I'm too old for anybody to hire. If we do, we're going to find that dark place a difficult place to be in. But in the midst of the darkness, we can find peace as we begin to refocus on God. That verse 2, Jonah says, I called to the Lord out of my distress, and he answered me. Out of the belly of Sheol I cried, and he heard my voice. Here is this wayward, rogue prophet. Open defiance to God is now re-looking at God, refocusing on God. You know, in life, sometimes we get so distracted by the things that are causing us pain, the things that put us in darkness, we lose sight of God, and there is no peace. We find peace when we begin to refocus on God, when we put God where God needs to be. So that means not only did he refocus on God, but also I believe he realigned his will with God's will. God, whatever you want me to do, I'll do it. I'm going to be in agreement with you. If you want me to go to Nineveh, I'll go to Nineveh. You see, the peace comes when we begin to realign our will with God's will. When we begin to be in agreement with God. When we begin to see things as God sees. When we do that, then we begin to experience the peace. We don't experience peace when we're contrary to God's will. We don't experience peace when we're running from God's will. We experience peace when we are in God's will. Even in the midst of darkness, we experience peace when we put ourselves in God's will. And so he has refocused himself. He's realigning himself with God. In verse 9, with the voice of thanksgiving, I will sacrifice to you. What I have vowed, I will pay. Deliverance belongs to the Lord. That is, I'll do what you ask me to do. You'd be surprised the peace that we have in our life, how the struggle ends when we say, God, I'll do what you've asked me to do. I'll do what you want me to do. I'll do it. I'll do it. Again, he's still in the belly of this fish, but he's finding peace because he's aligning his will with God's will. And the last thing I notice in his prayer, there's a reevaluation of his priorities. Throughout this story up to this point, Jonah has put himself first. It has been about Jonah. What he wants, what he likes, what he is going to do. His number one priority was himself. I'd like to think this man has a family. This man has maybe a spouse and children and friends. He could care less. He's fixing to take a trip a year and a half away, 2,000 miles away, because it's about him. The storm, the problem at sea, it's about him. Everything is about him. And so often in life, we make everything about ourselves. It's about me. Not my spouse, not my children, not my friends, not my faith, not my church. It's about me. Everything is about me. When you reevaluate your priorities, you make everything about God. You give God his central place, that God is first, that God comes first. Not my thoughts, not my ideas, not my feelings, not my wants, but God comes first in my life. God comes first in my life. Verse 7, as my life was ebbing away, I remembered the Lord. As my life was ebbing away, I remembered the Lord. I wish I could tell you that you will never have any dark places in your life, that you'll never go through any dark times, but I would be lying out of my teeth. I wish I could tell you that because you're Christians, because you love the Lord and you've given your life to Christ, I wish I could tell you there would not be any dark places, any dark times in your life, but I would be lying. Even we go through dark times. Even you and I have dark places. And in those places, we find ourselves afraid. We find ourselves angry. We find ourselves sorrowful. We find ourselves hopeless. But even in the midst of these dark places, we can find peace if we refocus on God, if we align our will with his will, and if we make God our greatest priority, we can find peace. We can find peace. Can I ask you a question this morning? Is there someone here, you in a very dark place in your life right now? A very dark place. And you're finding it hard and difficult. It is filled with uncertainty and confusion. You feel trapped and overwhelmed. And you just don't know what to do. I don't want you to leave here this morning without knowing that you can find peace in the darkest of places. You can find God's peace when you put God back at the center of your life. When you begin to live for Christ as he's called you to live, that can happen. Who knows? Maybe God has put you in timeout. He's isolated you. He's let you be alone so you can think and reflect. And maybe like Jonah, you can have a change of heart. A change of heart. As Adam and them sing our final song this morning, we have an altar bench back here if you would like to come and pray. I'm going to stand, as Justin's been doing, I'm going to stand back there. And you may say, Jerry, I'm in a dark place this morning. It's been there a long time. I don't know how much longer it's going to last. But if I don't soon find some peace in my dark place, I am going to explode. I need some peace in my dark place. So we'll be back there. People from the Order of St. Luke, if you want prayer, I just ask you to come and pray.